Anyway, I had a good life. I met my husband in college, and he was a good man. We had 3 children. We had John and Julie and Joyce. I got stuck on the J names, but I like those names. I've had a good life.
That's good. And when you were in Warrensburg, you all were house parents to a fraternity, right? Just
We
for one of your
were.
jobs.
My-
You were the adults.
Yeah, can you imagine? My husband was a true Scotchman. He found a way he could to make a penny. Well, we didn't know if we could make it as a couple. We couldn't get married till he saved $1,000, he said. So after he saved $1,000, we got married, and he found out that the lady where he had been living always went to Florida in the winter, and the house was home base for the Sig Tau fraternity. And she asked my husband if he and I would be house parents. She had a little apartment in the back of the house, and so he said, yeah, we would for free rent. When we weren't the best of house parents, we didn't care what the boys did, and they practically tore the place down. And about once a month, we would change their sheets, but no more often than that, and wash them, and the towels, and they about did as they pleased.
Well, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Well, then,
And my husband worked at the Star Cleaners too.
right there on Highway 13.
Yeah, 13. And he liked the people he worked for. In fact, he liked about everybody, and I like about everybody too.
And then you all moved to Kansas City.
We did.
And he worked for the
Oh,
Internal Revenue Service?
Yeah, that was before we got married, I think. Anyway, after I went to college one year, I quit, and my brother George said there was an opening for a school teacher down at Cole, and he wanted me to apply, and I did, and I got the job, but I didn't care for school teaching too much. I quit and then went back to school. I guess that's when I met my husband. And we were so poor at that time, he didn't have a car. And anytime we'd go somewhere we had to walk, we'd walk to the movies or out to eat or whatever. Then he was able to get a car through the VA. They helped him buy a car. You couldn't even hardly buy a new car back then.
Because they were just starting up making it again, I'm sure. And what was your first new car? What was your first car? What was
his car?
Mm-hmm.
It was a Chevrolet. It was gray and pretty. And we were at the top of the hill with that new car.
That sounds good. And he came to Kansas City first and worked for the Internal Revenue Service?
Yeah, he did.
It seems like I remember you telling me that he slept in his car
Oh,
sometimes.
I know. It was so sad. As I look back on that, after we'd go out on a date, see, I lived in the country, and he had to get back to Kansas City and go to work. And he would drive back and park in Internal Revenue's parking lot and then spend the rest of the night in his car, then go to work. I don't know how he did it. Then he lived with the Collivers. He'd drive there and spend the rest of the week.
And that he met Glenn Colliver in college first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then lived with his parents, Owen and I can't think of her name, but Mrs. Colliver.
Can't think of it either.
But he lived in their house there in Northeast.
Mm-hmm. Lawndale,
In Lawndale, that was
Northeast Lawndale.
Northeast Lawndale. I see.
I don't know if that covered everything or not.
Well, I think it kind of did. And you all were married at your parents' house.
Yes,
And actually, you were born in that house too, right? You were
was.
born in that house and married in that
Mhm.
house.
That's kind of unusual.
Well,
I'd say all the kids were born in that house.
yeah. And that's the big house we went to see that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was lonesome growing up because I was all by myself.
Right, your nearest brother or sister was 11 years apart.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They
So-
were home for a while, and that was nice. They were good to me because you've got a picture of me on a horse.
Right.
Yeah. And when they went away to school, well, it was just me and my folks. And I felt like my folks were so old that now that I'm old, I think they weren't old at all. My mom was like 43 when I was born. My dad was 50 some odd. But that's a big age group when you see other kids with parents that are much
in
younger.
their 20s or 30s. Yeah.
But I had good folks, and my dad would bring me little presents once in a while. He would pick some wild blueberries. I remember once he brought me a little handful of those, and that was so nice. And once he brought me a puppy, and that was about the best. It was a little rat terrier, I think, and we couldn't decide what to name her. And we had Helen and Homer come over and try to help name her. And I remember Homer saying, well, Wallace Simpson's in the news. Why don't we name her Wally? So that's what we decided to call my little dog, was Wally. And she was a good little dog. My mom would, she knew I was lonesome. I would look around everywhere when I was real little, just thinking, wishing I could find a little brother or a little sister. I remember the story Thumbelina was popular, and I thought, maybe I'll just find a little teeny tiny brother or sister on a leaf somewhere. But of course I never did, and I thought, oh, at least I don't care if it's black or white, I just want a little brother or sister. But of course that didn't happen. I thank heavens, probably my folks thought. And but my mom sometimes would fix a little picnic, and there was another couple of kids in the neighborhood, and the little girl and I would meet halfway, and we'd share a little picnic lunch. And I had a good life, but lonesome.
Yeah. Now, did y'all have a telephone then?
We did. We had a telephone. We didn't have electricity.
Yeah, you didn't have electricity, but you had a telephone.
Mm-hmm.
So that was before electricity came to the country.
Mm-hmm.
So you all read by oil lamps at
Yeah.
night, and
We had an Aladdin lamp, and it was just wonderful. It had a, what do you call those things? Not a filter, but it was...
like a wick or
No, that was kerosene light. I don't know what they're called.
but it made a bright light.
Made a good bright
had a
light.
globe or
Mhm.
let's see, what did it burn? Did it burn oil
I
or
can't remember. I guess it burned oil because we were burning gas. My mother cooked on a coal stove, and she liked to, this is hard to believe, but she really liked to use cobs to bake with because you could regulate the heat. You could put in a few more if you wanted it hotter. Or
yeah,
if you didn't,
just
you
corn
let-
cobs.
Mhm.
Just, yeah, and but then did you all had radios
We had a radio.
that ran on a battery or
Yeah, I think they were Battery. And I like to watch Captain Midnight. Love to watch Captain Midnight. And I think that he came on about the time the news did. So sometimes I would change the clock. This is so bad.
No, that's good.
And my dad had tried, he think well, it's about time for the news. Well, the way I changed the clock, the news had already passed. So I wasn't a little angel.
Well, you got to do what you got to do.
That's true. Oh, dear.
Oh, that big old house. I remember you saying that you all had farm hands, or people would travel through and work and live with you, and your mom would cook for them. Have to.
Yeah, my dad sometimes had a hired hand that lived with us, but he always had workers that worked for him.
Yeah.
And sometimes there would be people that just lived on their land. I forget what you call those.
Like
nesters.
squatters?
Squatters.
Yeah.
They'd set up a little tent and they would steal chickens. We'd hear the chickens squawking at night, and we figured that they were going to get them one or two and have chicken for dinner. And my dad didn't care if they lived there.
Oh, he didn't. He didn't run them off.
No.
And hired him. I know you were telling me about your mom would have to wring a chicken's neck every day, or
yeah.
several, and cook for all those people. And
Yeah, she worked really hard. All farm women worked really hard back then. But I'd watch my mom kill the chickens, and then I would act crazy running around because the chickens would run around too after they had their heads chopped off.
she'd have to boil them or scald them and
Yeah,
feather
she
them.
had a big pan of boiling water, and after the chickens had died, and she'd scald them and pull the feathers off, then butcher them, I guess, and rinse them off good and fry them. There was nothing. Chicken nowadays doesn't taste like farm-grown chickens that ran around and ate bugs. And she made her spending money by selling eggs. And sometimes, well, I was always with my mom. I was really close to her. And I'd go about everywhere she went. I'd go with her to gather the eggs, and lots of times she would reach under an old hen and she'd feel something cold under there. Oh my gosh, she'd holler and say, "There's a snake under there." And of course, I just went wild, yelling and hollering, and she'd say, "Go get the hoe." And then she'd, I guess, reach under there, get the old hen on, and then she'd take the hoe and pull the old snake out and cut its head off. It would always be a big old black snake.
That would just get under the chickens and eat the eggs.
Mm-hmm.
That's just... And you had to go out at night and gather up the chickens.
In the fall, we did.
In the fall, they wouldn't come in?
No, they would be up in the trees. And that was, you can't imagine how dark it is. In the country, we'd carry a lantern. And they'd see the chickens on the tree limbs, and we'd get them down. And then my folks, I don't know if they did it then or not, but they'd clip one of their wings so they couldn't fly anymore. But you could, I forget how many I could carry as a little person, probably one in each hand.
Just by their feet and upside down?
Upside down. Put
Probably didn't like that very much.
Oh, I don't think they cared. They was asleep.
Oh, they were asleep because it was dark. They just...
Oh, yeah.
Silly old things. Well, that...
Yeah, my mother did lots of canning, and it was my job to wash the jars because my hands were little and I'd go down in the jars. And you just can't imagine how hard she worked. And I was really friendly with my nieces and nephews, the older ones. They were like brothers and sisters. And their parents were good to bring them up and let them stay with the folks and play with me. And Mary Helen and I talked about at least once a week.
And she used to come visit all the
Oh,
time.
yeah, and she'd spend the night. And she'd ask her mother, when are we going to go up home? She called it home, too.
Uh-huh.
So, and of course, Jean and Harold,
You were about the same age.
we could stay out all day and didn't have to come in. My folks didn't care how dirty I got. Their folks didn't care how dirty they got. We'd wade in the creek, and we were just little nomads. And I would go visit them and stay all night sometimes. And I know they had a pond, and once we got in an old wash tub and got out on that pond, and their folk, my brother George was so mad at us because we were floating around out there. But
What do you think, you were going to drown?
I guess we didn't have any business doing it.
Of course, that's why it sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Well, it does sound like fun. A big old metal wash tub?
Yeah, big old metal wash tub.
Did you just use your hands to paddle? Or?
Probably.
Oh. Well, I know you told me about the gypsies. There were actually gypsies in Missouri that wandered around.
Well, there were more gypsies when my brothers and sisters were young than when I was. But everybody was scared of the gypsies. They would just be coming up the road. We lived way off the main road. And we'd see if a wagon was coming up the road, we'd wonder, well, who could it be? And sometimes it would be the gypsies. They were always selling something or wanted something to eat. And back when my brothers and sisters were young, I guess my folks invited them to sit at the table and eat with them. And after they did that one time, they didn't do it anymore because some of the gypsies would just pick up the cream pitcher and drink out of the pitcher. And they didn't have very good table manners, I guess. So after that, if gypsies came along, my folks just gave them whatever they had, some bread or meat, and sent them on their way. But sometimes they would sleep in the barn on the hay.
You just let them just pull up and sleep in the barn.
Mm-hmm.
And what did they do? They just traveled around
They traveled around trying to sell things. I think they stole things, tell you the truth.
All right, and then sold them somewhere else. Well, it's tough getting along.
Yeah.
You were just telling us about Mr. Tut.
Oh, Mr. Tut. Well, there was another man that came through the neighborhood selling fine linens, actually from Ireland. And I still have a tablecloth that's so pretty. Of course, you have to iron it, and who wants to iron? So I hardly ever use it, but my mother always had a white tablecloth on the table. But Mr. Tut would drop by, and back then when somebody came to your house, you asked them to stay for a meal. And I asked him always if he'd like to have dinner, and he would. And anyway, my mother had made a pie, a damson plum pie, and those are so good. It was my brother Jim's favorite pie. But you're supposed to take the seeds out. But my mother was in a hurry, so she baked a pie and didn't take the seeds out. And when Mr. Tut bit into it, he said, "Oh, this pie's got rocks in it." So he didn't know what to make of that. But he was just lucky to get a piece of pie.
Oh, those are, now you were saying told me one time that your dad lost his farm. That
I think he lost it maybe 2 times, and
many times just the crops failed or things didn't.
just he couldn't make the payments, I guess.
And that's when y'all moved to Clinton.
No, they moved to Clinton after I was gone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, where did y'all go?
But he could, I guess they let him stay there.
But he just didn't have control over it.
Mhm.
And, yeah. But then he was able to save money and make the back payments. And,
Yeah. See, the banks all closed, and even if you had any money, you couldn't get to it.
yeah.
So those are bad times. I lived through the dust storm. Some of the warmest temperatures on record were, I think, in 1936. It was like 107, I think. I got it written down somewhere.
Yeah.
But those were awful times. We had grasshoppers, and we had army worms, and they would dig a trench around a field and put, I think it was sawdust soaked in kerosene they'd put in there, and then the grasshoppers maybe would get down in there and they'd pull a log along and try to squash them, I think. That might not be a true story.
Well, no, I've heard that from Dad, too.
Really?
That they would dig a trench and hitch a pair of mules up to a log and just go around and around and just squishing the
grasshopper.
Or the army worms,
The
too.
army worms, yeah. You just can't imagine the old grasshoppers, how big they were, and they'd get on you with their old scratchy legs, and so scary.
Yuck.
Yuck. We always had plenty to eat and lots of good food.
Did your dad have cows? And
My dad raised pigs.
Oh,
He
pigs.
liked to raise pigs. But we always had milk cows.
uh-huh.
And he liked to farm with mules. He didn't like to farm with horses.
So you always had some mules.
Mm-hmm. We had Andy and Mandy and Kate and Beck. And I remember in my innocence once asking my dad, well, how do you tell them apart? And he raised his eyebrows and kind of laughed, and he never did tell me how he told Andy and Mandy apart.
But he could.
He could. I think that's just about my life history. Your dad had a more interesting life. Too bad you didn't get his story.
Well, he had some funny stories.
He was a storyteller.
We'll get back to that in a minute, but I was just thinking about, you were telling me that your dad was sometimes depressed.
He was depressed.
That he suffered from depression.
Mhm, he did. He would threaten, well, I don't know if he'd run away. Once I remember the neighbors all looking for him. I think there was a flood. And
You told me there was a big storm came, and in the middle of that storm he ran out into the night and was gone for a while. Which is, it's just awful.
it was awful. And my dad would cry. A man don't cry usually, but they should if things get too bad.
Yeah.
But yet it's pretty hard to see. And I was all by myself. Well, not that, but I mean, I thought, oh, if something happens to my mom and dad, what will I do? Where will I go? So,
I'm sure you would have lived with one of your brothers and sisters.
well, I probably could have, but
Sure, but they wouldn't have let you be an orphan.
surely not. I
I
hope
don't
not.
think so.
You know, at one of our DAR meetings, we had a lady come talk to us about the orphan trains. Used to be, kids were just put in on a train and sent to Kansas or Missouri. And
they'd get off and people would pick a kid out.
They'd just stand on a stage and they'd want the big, strong ones to work.
And if they didn't get picked, they'd just get back on the train and keep going?
I guess, I don't know. But that was an interesting program. I did not go talk so much.
No, I didn't. Ever just talking.
Did we get it all covered?
Oh, no, not yet.
Oh, not yet. I thought we did.
No, are we still on?
Oh yeah, still go.
Well, I remember you telling me you wanted a horse.
Oh, I did. I wanted a Shetland pony. Because Mary Helen and Billy had a Shetland pony. And some other friends did too, but my dad wouldn't get me one.
And was it just because he didn't like horses so good? He liked mules better?
Really, when I came along, Jim was, well, after I was big enough to want a horse, Jim was in medical school and every extra penny went to help pay his bills.
Yeah, I see.
There wasn't any money. But yet I always had nice clothes and nice shoes. I remember my mom always bought me, I think they were called Lazy Bones shoes. And they weren't just your common ordinary shoes, but I had nice clothes.
And you all had plenty to eat.
All had plenty to eat. In the winter, the best thing in the world was to have 4 buckled overshoes. I was an outside person. I had stayed outside day and night if I could. And if I had 4 buckle overshoes, I could get in some really deep snow.
And were those like the rubber shoes?
Yeah.
Like I used to have 4 buckle
Did
overshoes.
you?
Didn't we have those? We had
Yeah.
you put them on over your shoes. And, yeah.
That's a good thing.
Well, those are a good thing.
And when we slid down hills, sometimes some neighbors' kids, well, John Howard and May Marie, would come down and we would just get a big cardboard box and slide down the hill. That was a pretty good sled.
Heck yes.
I always had a good warm coat and a good warm hat and scarf and gloves.
And was your main heat in the house from the kitchen stove?
We had a furnace.
Oh, a coal furnace,
Coal
in,
furnace.
in the basement of that house. I remember I saw that down there. Yeah. But didn't you tell me one time that you would put like a brick or something in a rag and put it at the foot of your bed? Or?
Oh, yeah. An old iron that you ironed with, wrap it in a woolen cloth.
Put it on the stove for a while or
Mm-hmm.
in the fireplace? Or?
Mm-hmm. Let it get pretty hot and wrap it in newspapers first, I think, and then a wool rag. That's pretty good foot warmer.
Keep you going through the night. Did they deliver newspapers to the house out there, or did you just get a newspaper?
They came in the mail.
Oh, in the mail. Let's see.
Mm-hmm. Cappers Weekly.
Cappers Weekly.
Do they still have Cappers Weekly?
I don't think so. Is that
The
something
Clinton
like?
Eye, I think.
Huh?
And the Clinton Eye.
Oh, right. Well, that still exists, doesn't it? Or the Democrat?
The Clinton Eye does.
Oh, those are interesting times. I know you've got that piece of wallpaper down in the basement that you wrote on the back of. That
I wrote my name. It was a piece of plaster.
Oh, right. But didn't you and your dad hang that wallpaper, you said?
Oh, we did. We papered a room, but I think that was just a plaster
That came later that you all got.
that somebody rescued for me. And the grandkids dropped it and broke it.
Oh, well, but it's glued back
It's
together.
glued together.
That's
Yeah.
just another funny story.
Yeah.
Think ahead. Why was that? When you all lived in the country, was that house built, or did you all build that house? Did your dad build that house? Have it built?
My grandma and grandpa McQuitty lived there first, and then My folks, when they first got married, lived in a little house, kind of.
On that property?
Mhm.
On that?
I think so. And then they traded houses, I think.
When they started to have kids?
Mm-hmm.
I see. I just remember that house is so big and has such a huge attic up there in it. And you all would play up there in the attic, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the wintertime when it's too cold to go out.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't be cold up there, too.
Yeah, I guess we should be out of the wind a little bit.
Yeah, the whole house was cold.
So they built that barn probably at the same time. I wonder, would that have been in like that would have been in like the 1870s maybe or so when that house was built?
I just don't know.
I mean, if your parents built it, it
parents
probably would have been.
got married in the 1900s, I think.
Your parents got married in the 1900s.
So maybe that house was built in the 1800s. You've seen a picture of it, haven't you?
Yeah. And that barn, I was so amazed by that barn since it was all kind of cut and joints and had big wooden pegs driven in that held it all together. It's probably about falling down now.
Oh, probably. I'm glad Jill didn't get hurt going in it.
We had to explore ourselves.
But Mary Helen and I, when we were just little kids, they always put like oats in one room after they'd been harvested, and we'd play in those oats. It's kind of dangerous, I think.
You could probably sink.
Yeah.
But just like it was a big sandbox.
Mm-hmm. We did about everything. I would go stay all night with, I'm sure Hildreth was just like a second mother to me, and I'd spend the night down there lots of times. We would watch William milk the cows, and Mary Helen and Billy liked to drink milk, fresh milk, but I never did like it. But
would he squirt it at him?
He'd squirt it at them, but sometimes they'd get a cup and have a cup. It was a different life now.
Well, we're just so civilized now, we just can't even imagine that that's just the way people really live.
Yeah. My dad hated to milk a cow. And of course,
he had milk cows.
He had milk cows. And of course, Jim and Ray had to milk when they were home. And then my dad hated it so bad that my mother would do a lot of the milking. We always had milk and cream.
And did y'all make butter? And did she
made
make butter?
She used to whip butter in a bowl. But your dad's mother used to churn. We had a cream separator. They sold cream too.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that old separator. Hadn't thought about it for ages.
Yeah, I remember Didn't Dad used to walk a route in Calhoun, pulling a wagon, selling milk? And
he had a carrier.
Oh, on his back?
On his bicycle.
Oh, on his bicycle.
Yeah. His dad sold milk. They all did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good stories. And your dad had so many good stories. Like when there was a man in Calhoun that shot himself, and the undertaker, of course, lived in Calhoun, and your dad was leery of anything like that. And the undertaker kept asking your dad if he didn't want to come in and see Mr. whoever it was. And your dad said, no, I don't want to go see him. So anyway, this one day, I can't remember the whole story, your dad was delivering milk up there, and for some reason, the undertaker said, well, come on in and put the milk in the refrigerator. So, well, they shut the door, and there was this body laid out, and your dad about had a fit. Don't put that in the story.
Well, that's a pretty good part.
But that would let Eddie ain't tell that story.
Well, I can just about hear that right
Yeah.
now. Think of his
Really don't put that in. That's too dark.
Oh, it's just a story. Well, he had the cousin that was the kleptomaniac, didn't he? Or didn't they have a
A
relative?
friend. That
Oh, a
was
friend.
Anna. She just stole everything. She'd steal your glasses, or from your grandma McArthur, she stole her scissors once.
Mhm. And didn't they know just to follow her home? And
Mhm.
as soon as she got home, they'd just find what she'd taken and
Yeah.
pick it up, and
She just couldn't help herself.
just had to steal stuff. Well, when you all, after you were married, you all moved up here to Kansas City, and so Dad still worked for the Internal Revenue Service when you all moved up here, or had he gone to work for the insurance company?
Well, see, he worked for a lumber yard in Warrensburg.
Oh, all right, that's right.
Yeah. And I think that's when we might have. He worked for Hall Lumber.
Mhm.
And I think he went to school at the same time.
He certainly knew everything about lumber and hardware.
Yeah, he liked to work there. And when he came to the city, he had trouble finding a job, just like you are, and people would give him a bad time and ask him, well, how come you think you could sell insurance there? How come you think you could settle a claim?
Yeah, and
That's
that was post-war. That was
Mhm.
after that.
Mm-hmm. Even after college. And,
Yeah.
Life's pretty tough.
Well, it is. But then the first place you all moved up here was over to Stonewall Courts when you came to the city?
I think that's where you were born.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we lived at Stonewall Court, and Mary Helen lived just up the street from us.
Hmm.
They lived with her in-laws, and she used to babysit you.
Huh.
And she said you could sure cry loud. Oh,
Well, that's good.
yeah, it showed you were healthy.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, my squawker going.
Let's see what else.
So that was
Then we moved over there on North McCoy.
the block north of the Truman Library.
Mhm. My folks liked to visit us up there because my dad would walk up and watch them work on the library. There was a nice little park just right down the.
Slusher Park,
Across.
wasn't it?
What was the name of it?
Slusher? Was that Slusher Park right kind of across the street?
Could it have been just McCoy Park?
Well, it could have been. I don't know what I'm thinking of. Slusher Park. But
And that's where Julie was born. Was when we lived on North McCoy. And when she was about 2, I think we started building this house.
yeah. Moved over here, and this was the first street on this house. This was,
Yeah,
I mean, in this neighborhood, wasn't it? This
there
was,
weren't too many.
yeah, it's all the big woods.
Mm-hmm. And it was a good place for you kids to grow up, and a pretty good time. Wasn't much crime. They could roam around, and
And we did.
you did. You did terrible things. They would get in the sewer. Was it not the sewer, but
the
the
storm,
storm drains.
and explore. There,
Gosh, you could have got lost, and we could have never found them.
they were good places to explore, though. They
They played army, and
ran around in those woods, played army. It's still dark.
yeah. They always had to be home by 6 o'clock. And I remember once John was up at Randy's, I think, on his bike, and he realized almost at 6 o'clock I better head for home. And he came barreling down the street as fast as he could. Couldn't get stopped and went right through the back garage wall.
Yeah, I used to like to go right in there as fast as I could
It
and
was
slam on
screeching.
my brakes on that slick concrete and slide and turn. And one time I was going too fast. He hit that wall and went right through it, the back wall of the garage.
It was so funny, we couldn't be too mad.
Oh no. And I learned how to fix drywall.
Oh, we did.
Dad showed me how to put a piece of screen behind there and tie a string on it, pull it out, and then plaster it.
I didn't know that.